Hello, Bobs. We got some more Jeffers, Robinson Jeffers. This time I'm going to his selected letters. I don't know if this is the original copy I had. I'm assuming it's not. But I used to have a copy, and it had a poem written by Radcliffe Squires included, but I sold it. Squires wrote a book about Jeffers. Let me see if maybe it's the loyalties of Jeffers. Loyalties of Robinson Jeffers. Where's Radcliffe Squires? I have two copies of it. Yeah, it's the Loyalties of Robinson Jeffers. Two copies. And since I mentioned that, I will try to find the letter he wrote to Squires. I don't know why I sold the poem, but after I sold it, I was like, maybe I shouldn't have sold it. Not that it's a big deal, but it would be nice to have it back. Radcliffe Squires, letters to 340. That ain't it. It's got to be page 340. To preface this, Jeffers was noted for not writing back. As you can imagine, once you get famous, you have all kinds of people writing you. And this letter to Squires goes, February 3rd, 1951. Dear Mr. Squires, thank you. I'll be glad to see the second volume of your poems to be published this spring. I confess that I have no remembrance at all of the first one, but you write as if they may not be displeasing to you. Probably I didn't even acknowledge it. Writing letters has always been ridiculously difficult for me. I can't answer a quarter of those that come. But I'll do my best to write an answer about your book. Sincerely, Robinson Jeffers. See if we can find more Squires. 348 and then 362, 63. Dear Mr. Squires, I enjoyed your book, Where the Compass Spins, and was much interested, but it is practically impossible for me to write letters. I have resolved time after time to write at least the more important ones, and it always fails. My wife used to answer some of them for me, and now my daughter-in-law does a few, but she has a family of her own. Your doctoral dissertation, as you describe the tension of your thought, must be very interesting, and perhaps disturbing, as you say. I should normally like to see it, but what can I do or say about it? I will make a great confession. My particular desire has been to be dead, or at least unconscious, before people begin to talk about my verses. Not that they are bad, not that they are good. I have given them to the world, if it wants them, and perhaps I shall write more in the future. But I wish that this particular aggregation of cells myself were not concerned. Best wishes, and sincerely, Robinson Jeffers. Let's get to this, the final ones. I can't remember which year that Squires wrote that to him, but to Radcliffe Squires, 1957. Dear Mr. Squires, I owe you humble apologies, a number of them. First, for that silly article in the Saturday Review. The hatred was directed, of course, against me, but you had to be included in it, and I am sorry. Second, and maybe worse, I have to confess that I have never to this day read your book. You sent it to me or someone did, but all those faces on the dust jacket so frightened me that I put it away unread. That was pure self-indulgence. I always try to avoid reading about myself, but at least I should have acknowledged the gift, and I'm sorry to have failed. Now I've brought the work out again and turned a few pages. It seems to me well written and well thought, and I thank you for it. As to Rexroth's article, Rexroth attacked Jeffers, it is not disturbing, but merely obvious. It has happened several times before, and they always say the same things. I'd never have read it. I don't read the Saturday Review, except that our local newspaper, the Monterey Peninsula Herald, reprinted it on their editorial page with a big bad portrait of me. My daughter-in-law read it first and said, "You have an enemy." I said, "Thousands of them. So many people I have insulted by not answering their letters, and I blame myself for it, but the Herald's correspondence columns were thick for several days with indignant letters to the editor. Then they reprinted several poems of mine on their editorial page and paid me for the use of them, and the editor wrote me a letter of apology. It is all very funny. The copy I used ends here. Squires cannot locate the letter. I guess he wasn't impressed with letters from Jeffers either. There's Jeffers in the woods. Or at least, maybe those, I doubt that was his front yard. It's not big enough to be that. Plus that looks like water behind him. Anyways, there's a passage in this letter to Mark Van Doren. Let me turn this frickin' little heater off. To Mark Van Doren, March 14th, 1930. Dear Mark, is that too abbreviated? As for me, I'm familiarly called by the name of a little red-breasted bird, but perhaps Robin won't seem to you any more fitting than Robinson. I hope it will, because there's nothing else to suggest. I was baptized John R., but nobody ever called me John since that moment. Perhaps the baptism didn't take... As to the review of my verses, you take my disagreement too much in earnest. I ought rather to have said thank you. All I was thinking was that there has been, this time, no intention of expressing my peculiar ideas in the poem. Least of all through the Judas's mouth. The thing was only an attempt to use our only demigod as a mask in a tragedy. And you seemed to impute to me more than I meant. As to not writing what you set out to write, who does? I'm sure that I never have. But it's true that I ought to apologize for my words on the jacket of the book, that book. Live right, live right. I don't know what the actual pronunciation is. Live right always writes to me for a description for his catalog, just when a book is half finished and least describable. And I never have the faintest idea what to say and invent something and do it very badly, no doubt. But it was not meant for a sort of preface on the dust jacket, only for salesman's talk in the fall list. It would be a great pity if you were in earnest about not reviewing people's verses anymore. I hope that was only the expression of passing impatience. It's a thankless job, no doubt, but most jobs are, and nobody does it better, nor with intelligence more good-naturedly. We've settled into our old habits here as if we had never wandered, and have no news. The past 2 weeks, we've been watching Lindbergh fly his kite from the hill south of us and hang in the wind like a sparrowhawk over our point. We beggared ourselves the other day to buy a little more land on our north boundary, because it has a natural granite column on it that we call the altar stone. My wife is as mad about rocks as I am, fortunately, or rather as she. Yours on approval, Robin Jeffers. And the footnote was in his review of Dear Judas, Judas, Savior of Jesus, the Nation. Van Doren objected to Jay's jacket remarks on the special interpretation of love controlling the themes of both Dear Judas and the Loving Shepherdess. Sorry. I usually go into a coughing fit or a sneezing fit after I drink coffee. The original of this letter is in the restricted Robinson Jeffers collection at the University of Alabama. How's that mean? Melba Bennett's version in her stonemason differs only slightly from this, which was published in Andrew Smithberger and Camille McColl on Poetry. Mrs. Bennett collects a number of Jay's statements distinguishing poetry from prose and otherwise defining poetry and the poetic process, including Jay's hitherto unpublished preface to Tamar. The word poetry is one of those abstract words covering a complex of things, like the word beauty. So various for different persons that the only definition I could give would be a bad one out of a dictionary. I suppose the point is to distinguish poetry from unpoetic verse and from poetic prose. As to the latter, it seems to me that the word poetry, of course, there's my child texting me that it snowed, at least in English, implies some form of verse. I don't know if I can answer my child without this. I should say without looking in the dictionary, is a form of speech characterized by rhythmic recurrences, so that there is a noticeable and fairly regular correspondence of some sort between the lines or lines and stanzas. I think the difference between poetry and unpoetic verse lies in the appeal of poetry to the aesthetic emotion, so that one might say that poetry is beautiful verse, but the beauties of verse may be so various and disputable, from sublimity of subject to mere virtuosity of expression, that personal taste must in the end do the distinguishing. I think the quality I most value in poetry is that of imaginative power, activated by strong emotion, so that the imagination is not displayed idly for a show, but as if of necessity and in earnest under emotional compulsion. As to practical suggestions for a student beginning the study of poetry, of course there are many ways. It seems to me I'd begin with the ballads of action, Scott's border minstrelsy. If the dialects were not too difficult, then short lyrics as of Shelley, Keats, Eric, Andrew Marvell. For the study of poetic form, I'd direct the student's attention to essential imitations of classic meters like Tennyson's and Swinburne's, and to some well-made rendering in modern English of the old versification of Beowulf and Piers Plowman, as well as to the metrical instances of today and last century, and some Old Testament poetry to face the Hebrew verse like an echo in the mountains. Sincerely yours, Robinson Jeffers. Bukowski often claimed that Jeffers' letters were too staid, but I don't think they are. I mean, what's he supposed to say? Hey, motherfucker, I'm drunk. Which he was, especially after Una died. Let's see if Muriel Rukeyser is in here. Yeah, she is, 284. I wonder if he just mentions her. Wonder where Muriel Rukeyser. There it is. Una J to Geraldine Udell. Of course, Donnan Jeffers impregnated Muriel Rukeyser, even though a recent hit piece in some publication that I can't remember, written by, I think, Rukeyser's granddaughter, accused Donnan of being anti-Semitic and Jeffers of being fascistic, which I don't believe, considering that Rukeyser was supposedly is a Jew, or was a Jew when she was alive, and if Donnan was anti-Semitic and he impregnated her and she was in love with him, it would seem kind of contrary, but who knows? Maybe it was. I don't think Jeffers was. He didn't seem the type. But we shall see what he says about Rukeyser here, or Una says. And will be interesting for Una's take on Rukeyser, since that was her daughter-in-law, erstwhile daughter-in-law. Una J. to Geraldine Udell, Poetry, a Magazine of Verse. Dear Miss Udell. I won't do it. Replying to your letter of April 25th, Robinson Jeffers agrees to the fairness of limiting the selection to authors of works published during the period of time since Miss Monroe's death. He somewhat favors the selection of a young poet for the award, 11. In case an older poet were selected, he would vote for Frederick Mortimer Clapp in preference to Cummings. He is agreeable to Muriel Rukeyser receiving the award, but in case Mr. Dillon wishes to recommend some other poet, would be glad to consider another. He thinks regard should be paid to need and special circumstances, other than other things being equal. Very sincerely, Una Jeffers. In case he should be asked to consider the work of another young poet, and there is need of haste, perhaps Mr. Dillon would lend him the volume. Sometimes books are not to be had immediately here on the coast. So that's interesting. The Jeffers family supposedly would not recognize the grandchild, but if that were the case, why would they promote Rukeyser to get a prize, to get an award from Poetry magazine? I'll have to look into this matter further. I haven't really followed the Jeffers Foundation or Torhouse Foundation take on any of this drama, but maybe they acknowledge it. I do not know. It's just strange to me that Una, the grandmother, who would have been the grandmother of this child that they supposedly never acknowledged, would be writing a letter in favor of granting a prize to a woman they wanted nothing to do with. Strange. Una Jeffers to Frederick Ives Carpenter. He also wrote a biography, one of those, I think it was Twain's author biographies. I have it over here if you really want to see it, but I don't think you do. Dear Mr. Carpenter, my husband is busily typing his new book, probably called Be Angry at the Sun, a great book, and seems unable to write letters. I have the following statement from him in answer to your question. As to the Hawk verse, note first, accept the penalties. The penalties did not mean only hanging or imprisonment, but also the inner revulsion, the disgust and emotional discord, which, however, would spring from training, not nature. For people can be trained to kill as easily as they can be trained not to. The average hawk seemed to me, and still seems, a more beautiful and nobler creature than the average man. Besides that, men swarm by millions, and hawks are rare. So if I had stopped to ask myself, is that a true statement, I should have said yes, accept the penalties. There was no misanthropy involved, but only a comparison, and there was no question of inflicting pain that would put a different face on the matter, but only of sudden death. And I think it was a salutary statement, for certainly men overvalue themselves and their lives. That is practically word for word his answer. The poem is Hurt Hawks, and Jeffers had taken care of the hawk because it landed injured, and eventually he said the bird came to him and asked for death because he could no longer fly. And Jeffers famously gave him the lead gift in the twilight. I gave him the lad gift in the twilight, brother. To Justine Lind. Miss Lind, preparing a thesis on Jay at the University of Kentucky, wrote him on February 6, 1939, asking that he indicate the influence of Freud and Jung on his work, and that he respond to an excerpt from Beatrice Hinkle's book, The Recreating of the Individual. Dear Miss Lind, I have read a number of books by Freud and Jung and his disciples, but this was mostly 20 years ago, and I do not remember the titles of the books, nor which most impressed me. I have not read Beatrice Hinkle's book, and therefore speak more or less in the dark, but my first reaction to the paragraph you quote, necessity of self-creation, is to think that man cannot recreate himself any more than by taking thought he can add a cubit to his stature. No man can make an invention or a poem by willing it. They come or they do not come. We only prepare the way a little, sweep out distractions, and I think no man can make himself a new man by willing or desiring it. As for the present being a critical time for humanity, yes, but no more critical than a dozen former times, most of them prehistoric. Sincerely, Robinson Jeffers. Let's find some early letters. Maybe we'll find one to George Sterling, since I read his entire book on Jeffers. To Mary Austin. That's right, Austin was part of the colony of George Sterling. I guess Mary Austin wasn't very good looking. That's why they didn't let her be the bohemian that she wanted to be. There's old Jeffers. Surprised he let himself be in the book, but what's his name Sterling had some funny remarks about Harriet Monroe, calling her, saying she was a virgin. Awful stuff, but just to be expected between poets. That's one of the little Jeffers boys. Grandchildren. Not Mariel. To Albert Bender. Oh no, I don't see anything. There we go, George Sterling. Dear George. I wonder when George killed himself. To George Sterling, October 9th, 1926. Dear George, Rorty isn't perfectly kind, but he pays splendid tribute to Lilith, both form and content. I believe that's George's book, Lilith. And his irritation against strange waters, though it blinded him to some beautiful poetry, is quite justifiable if he thought that you were taking a lead from him. Of course you oughtn't, and of course you weren't. To come under Bierce's influence would be natural, and in the days before you were 30, but I don't believe that even he changed or made your manner to any extent, even though you said he did. I thought your long ago manner remembered Tennyson just a little. Perhaps it was only the verse form of the Testimony of the Sons. Your later is, of course, nobody's but Sterling's. It's pleasing to hear that Rorty isn't editor of the masses anymore. I like and admire him, besides owing him a lot, and I don't want to contribute to any magazine. Also, I think that ostentatiously proletarian atmosphere is too slipshod to be good for anybody, at least in this country. Not that it could change him, but I don't think he could change it. Yesterday, we took our Garth to the dentist and had 7 baby teeth drawn. The new ones were coming in beside them. 3 popped out rather easily. 4 needed Novocaine and regular extraction. They were all in condition to last a lifetime, but he didn't mind. There are lots more where they came from. Coming home, we stopped at the post office and found your box of sweets. Garth was as willing as anyone, and the boys thank you much. So do we. They're sharing it. Thank you also for the packages of Nations and Saturday reviews. No, I didn't see the reference in poetry. The blessed rain gave me 3 afternoons for doing stonework, but now I'm watering trees again with the same dogged continuance. Did we tell you Colonel Wood, Sarah Bardfield, her daughter, and her daughter's fiancé were in Carmel a while ago? We saw them one afternoon and part of another. They are beautiful people. I must ask Una whether there's anything you'd be interested to hear. She says she'll write her own gossip and not give it to me. She had a long letter from Masters the other day. She says if Mencken is at all so nice as Masters, you must be sure to bring him here if possible. Weren't you pleased to see Frank Devendorf, philanthropist, in the new Who's Who? Yours always, Robin. We'll return Rorty's letter and review in Una's big envelope. Freud. To George Sterling, November 4th, 1926. Dear George, I'm just incapable of reading a review all the way through. The second reading, it begins to dawn on me that Rorty's is worse than I thought. Over the proof, my mind was focused on his scolding you for not thinking enough of yourself. There I agree with him. Browning's Eagle and Wren, a light woman, is funny, but you mustn't invert it. As in that sonnet I never showed anyone and never will. But Rorty missed all the beauty. Except for his poems and some reviews. What a slop can the masses is. Here's a copy of Verses for Overland. Postmortem appeared in the December issue, which Sterling probably had assembled before his suicide. Yeah, I thought he died right around this time, but the only thing I could find, here's a copy of Verses for Overland, the only thing I could find, and I doubt you're wanting it. Don't dare let them use it for a frontispiece. Bobby's frontispiece, especially with more fitting ones of your own tucked away somewhere toward the back. And don't ask for any more, please. I'm going to do my firmest to keep out of magazines. It isn't good for me. It's good for you, but it isn't for me. You can get along in company. The boy's birthday present is a drive tomorrow to San Antonio Mission ruins beyond Jolon. I'll mail this on the way. Start 6 a.m., 180 miles, round trip. Yours always, Robin. Did you read that Brett Page escaped and hanged himself? I did not. I don't know if George ever got a chance to. I don't know. George may have had time, but see if we can find one letter to Una. Una, December 4th, 1912. Dearest in the universe, it's 1:45 a.m., and I've just returned to Pasadena from town, Los Angeles, and found your letter of Monday morning and clipping and catalog fragment awaiting me. Today I had lunch and a good talk with McGroarty, then saw Dr. Stuckey and gave him a copy of the great book. Then found Anderson, and then Willard Huntington, saw Miss Buckman, saw him write again, and was instructed to write a review of my own book for the book number of the Times, which is due next Sunday. So I wrote the review, and Wright is going to review it tomorrow and make it sound like himself. Afterwards, Wright and I went down to the Bristol Cafe for an hour and drank Wurzburger. Then I started home, and I'm just arrived. When the Times book number comes out, I'll send you it, and also my review of myself as written originally for sake of comparison, for I don't know what Wright will do to my very eulogistic article. Now I'm going to bed because I promised to meet Wright tomorrow morning and help him with what's left of the book number, which goes finally to press tomorrow. Andy and he have been losing sleep working on it, and are fearfully irritable, snarling at each other like two strange dogs. They tried to find me a week ago to assist them, but I wasn't in town. I was occupied with something better, dearest. All right. I know you want more. I know you crave more, but I'm going to drink my coffee and answer my child. Goodbye.